For the longest time, we're talking 30 years, if you were building a serious database server, you really only had one choice, period. But that's all changing. Right now, we're smack in the middle of a massive conflict in server architecture. You could even call it a Silicon Civil War.
So to really get what's happening today, we've got to take a step back and look at the kingdom that was. For decades, one single architecture ruled the entire data center with like an iron fist.
Yeah, for 3 whole decades, the Wintel Alliance, Windows and Intel, it wasn't just the big player on the block. It was the only player. It was the law of the land. Intel's x86 architecture was the undisputed king. And honestly, nobody was even close to challenging the throne.
But the thing about kings is their reigns don't last forever. And this king, he is absolutely under siege. That long, stable, predictable reign is now being threatened by a new challenger that's not just rising, it's rising fast.
And look, this is not some minor skirmish on the side. We're talking about a full-blown rebellion. The biggest players in the world, think AWS, Google, Microsoft, they didn't just switch suppliers, they stopped buying chips and started building their own. The whole industry is splitting right down the middle, and it's forcing every single DBA and architect out there to ask a tough question. Which side are we on?
So how in the world did we get here? This whole battle feels brand new, but it's really not. It's actually an echo of a war that was fought decades ago. It just goes to show you, history, well, it has a funny way of repeating itself. Okay, so let's jump into Time Machine. Back in the 90s, if you had a big, heavy-duty database, it was probably running on something called a RISC chip. Think Sun SPARC or IBM Power. These things were beasts, super specialized, really powerful, but also crazy expensive. Then Intel's x86 came along and just crushed them. It was cheaper, it was getting faster all the time, and before you knew it, it was absolutely everywhere. But here's the crazy part. That cycle is happening all over again. The big cloud giants, they're bringing RISC back from the dead, only this time it's called ARM.
So why? Why bring back this old idea? What's the real reason for this rebellion? Well, it all boils down to something pretty simple, actually. People started talking about the Intel tax, and for the biggest cloud companies on the planet, that tax just got way too high to keep paying.
Okay, so how does a different chip design actually let you escape this so-called Intel tax? The technical stuff can get, well, pretty deep in the weeds, but thankfully there's a really simple way to wrap your head around it. It's all about thinking of it as 2 totally different philosophies for how to get power. On one hand, you've got Intel's x86. That's what we call a RISC architecture. The best way to picture it? Think of a classic American muscle car. It's loud, it's got a ton of raw horsepower, and man, it burns a lot of fuel to go fast. It's trying to do everything at once with this huge, complex instruction set. Then you have ARM. That's a RISC architecture, and it's the total opposite. It's not one muscle car, it's an entire fleet of silent, efficient electric cars. They're simpler, they run cooler, and they are just brutally efficient. They use a reduced instruction set to do simpler tasks, but they do thousands of them with incredible efficiency. And all that efficiency, it's not just a nice idea on a whiteboard. It translates to cold, hard cash. This is the number that changed everything. AWS claims that their custom ARM chips, the ones they call Graviton, give you a 40% better price-to-performance advantage for really common databases like Postgres and MySQL. 40%. That's not a number you can ignore. That's the kind of number that makes the people holding the purse strings sit up, pay attention, and basically demand a change. All right, so with a massive claim like that on the table, where does that leave the rest of us? Well, what's happened is that the market has pretty much split right down the middle. We've now got 2 very distinct camps.
In one corner, you've got what you could call the old guard. They're still firmly planted in the x86 world. And that makes sense. If you're running these gigantic monolithic Oracle databases or some older legacy SQL Server instances, you're probably staying right where you are. You need that raw, single-core muscle car power, and you're willing to pay the premium for it. But then you've got the other camp, the modern cloud. If you go to spin up a new database on AWS today, they are practically begging you to use their ARM-based Graviton chips. All those modern workloads, Postgres, MySQL, Redis, they're just running faster and cheaper over there. This isn't theoretical, the migration is happening right now.
So, what's the bottom line here? It's simple. The monopoly's over. Done. The days when x86 was the only real choice, the only game in town, those days are gone. We have officially stepped into a multi-architectural world, and that changes the entire equation for everybody. And that brings us to the most important takeaway of all. The big strategic question for your infrastructure isn't just, should we go with Intel or AMD anymore? That's the old way of thinking. The real question you have to ask yourself now is much more fundamental. It's about philosophy. For your specific data, for your specific workload, do you need a muscle car or do you need a fleet?